Okay, wonderful, guys. I think let's get the ball rolling. I'm sure everybody's got things that they'd like to wrap up this evening as well. So thank you everybody for joining. Today is the 18th of May, and welcome to our sort of monthly webinar. We will be focusing on various different products, pathways, etc. We decided that this month we would focus on Australia as a whole. So everybody that's joining today would have already had a sort of interactional consultation with one of our lovely consultants. And we've come to the conclusion that you're a good applicant or a great applicant to apply for something generally called the Australian Skilled Migration Program. So everybody here knows that they're qualified. There's still a little bit of interest that's stimulating you guys wanting to come find out a little bit more. So hopefully we can give you enough information where you're at the point where you go, great, now is the right time and this is the best option. Kind of carpe diem and seize the moment. Okay, wonderful. So Taryn, you're going to share for us. There we go, with the screening share. So guys, so I wanted to kind of get the chat started. We're going to be talking a lot about the different sort of visa options for Australia as well. Now, Australia is actually, of course, one of only 2 countries in the world that offers an incredible program called Skilled Migration. Now, most people are completely oblivious to the fact of how other countries work. Now, every other country, other than another one, bar Australia, if you want to go live and work in, let's say, New Zealand, America, the UK, Europe, Middle East, or Asia, for example, then before you're eligible to actually work, you would need to actually secure an incredibly strong job offer in the country first. Then once you've secured a job offer, this particular company that wants to bring you into the country, they need to fork out considerable amount of capital to get sponsorship rights to bring in a foreigner to fill the vacancy. Only once you've managed to jump through all these hoops of fire, get over these hurdles, you then become eligible to apply for a work permit. Now, a lot of people think, great, a work permit is sort of instant gratification because I've got employment. I know I've got money coming in from day one. And that is true. But most people are completely oblivious to the fact that on a work permit, you have no access to any of the benefits offered by the country. Things like subsidized healthcare, education, social security, for example. And of course, one of the biggest risk implications by immigrating via a work permit, if that is your only option, is that unfortunately you are always bound to one employer. So heaven forbid anything should happen to the relationship with the employer or the employment contract, you bump heads with your boss. But if you do and you terminate employment or they cut ties with you, unfortunately you've then immediately breached your visa terms on a work permit. You are not with the company on your actual work permit, and they generally give you around 60 days to pack up and leave. The reason I actually wanted to talk about this is just to kind of let you know why skilled migration is such a sort of phenomenon and why it's such an incredible opportunity, because of course the Australian Skilled Migrant Program allows you to bypass a work permit, having to score through the, employment offers, getting rejected by various different employers. You gain access through your skill set. So the Australian government, if you can evidence you score enough points in the right occupation, simple as they allow you to apply for straight residency, not only for the main applicant, but for a partner and any dependent children as well. And of course, that comes with all the sort of benefits as well. Now, guys, before we kind of jump into the nitty-gritty, the slightly more boring stuff, I thought it'd be a nice way to kind of start this interaction by just showing you some fun facts about Australia. Okay, so with regards to Australia, as you can see, there are actually 10 times more camels than koalas in Australia. Fun fact, Canberra was originally chosen as the capital city as a result of an ongoing debate between Melbourne and Sydney over which would be the capital. Okay, there are actually 60 designated wine regions in Australia, so any of the wine lovers out there, you're not going to have to sacrifice any hobbies moving over to Australia. And Australia actually manages to produce around 1.35 trillion bottles of wine every year. Okay. Now, Australia is also home to the longest fence in the world, originally built to keep dingoes away from the fertile land. The fence is officially 5,614 kilometers long. Okay. And the final fun fact for the day, an Australian man once tried to sell New Zealand on eBay. Okay. Perfect. All right, guys. So, yeah, so I hope you found that slightly entertaining. What I'd like to do is just give you an indication because, you know, us as South Africans, we like to know job security, and some of the most common questions we get is, fair enough, we can get residency, but what is life going to be like on the other side? And am I going to be able to find a job that's able to, you know, support me and still maintain that good quality of life I've maintained within South Africa, for example? So when you look at a direct comparison, I mean, teachers, for example, and the reason we focus on these three occupations, sorry guys, if your occupation is not on the list, it's not favoritism. It's just that these are the three most common occupations in Australia, some of the three most in-demand occupations. And of course, these are the three most common sort of occupations that approach us on a daily basis. So of course, look, we all know it's relative as well. The cost of living in Australia is of course higher than South Africa, but you'll see the remuneration completely counteracts that as well. Whereas if you look, the average sort of income for a teacher in South Africa, I mean, it's quite a good one. I actually have a few friends whose fiancés and wives are teachers, and they're not hitting that 26,000 Rand threshold. But you can see the average sort of remuneration in Australia, teachers are earning around 91,000 South African Rand per annum. Okay. Tradesmen, of course, average sort of income for a tradesman in South Africa. This is across all spectrums, you know, diesel mechanics, petrol mechanics, fitters, turners, bricklayers, electricians, plumbers, etc. The average sort of income, according to the South African survey, is around 12,000 Rand. Whereas when you look at Australia, the average sort of income or annual sort of remuneration for a tradesman is around 81,000 Rand. I mean, that's a sort of no-brainer there. Engineers, of course, again, is a very generic engineering sort of scope. This is across all mediums of engineers. Average in South Africa, including internships, junior engineers, etc., is around 24,800 Rand. Whereas the average sort of income for an engineer in Australia is 96,000 Rand. But like I said, guys, we're not oblivious to the fact that the cost of living will go up when you get to Australia. But of course, that doesn't take into account all the benefits that you get where you are earning more. Your cost of living is a little bit more with regards to, you know, accommodation and things like that. But of course, you get a lot more back from the government in Australia. Things like subsidized education, healthcare, social security. I mean, I'm a father of 2 kids myself. I mean, my kids go to school and aftercare because my wife and I both work. And with the school fees and aftercare going up, and of course the medical aid going up in South Africa, my largest expense now is my school fees and my medical aid. It actually supersedes my mortgage at the moment. So, of course, if I was lucky enough to meet the requirements to move to Australia, those would be 2 expenses that would remain in my pocket every month. Okay, wonderful. So I wanted to actually take on a little sort of guide on the main sort of benefits of obtaining Australian residency. So it is the fastest pathway to citizenship, and an Australian passport is the Australian Skilled Migration Program. It allows applicants to access to job opportunities in various different industries with very high sort of minimum wage. It allows you access to free government schooling for kids and world-class universities. A lot of the universities and colleges in Australia will often partially subsidize tertiary education for residents and citizens as well, which is really nice. Excellent healthcare system with Medicare and private options. Personally, I mean, of the thousands of applicants over the last 7 years I've been in the industry, I've never actually, well, of course, the clients that I've stayed in contact with, I've never actually spoke to a client that needed private healthcare. I mean, I've got a lot of friends that are based in Australia, the clients that we've sent over previously, and what they are telling me is that Medicare, the state-funded healthcare system in Australia, is actually on par, if not better in some states than our private healthcare system here in South Africa. And the great thing is it covers everything other than things considered sort of cosmetic as well. Okay, you of course get a high standard of living, diverse multicultural society. So Australia actually has one of the highest qualities of life on the planet. And this is generally based on sort of 5 or 6 primary aspects. It's your healthcare system, it's your education system, it's crime statistics, average stress levels, average earnings per household, and general inflation rates. Now, a great thing to remember is Australia is one of the few countries in the world that still has not had a recession in the last 30 years or so. Even the 2008 sort of banking crisis that impacted South Africa, drove us into a recession, didn't actually affect the Australian market or economy as well. Okay, wonderful. Now, of course, Australia is one of the cleanest and safest environments with beautiful landscapes and beaches. And there was another crazy fact that we wanted to add, but if you had to visit one Australian beach every single day for the rest of your life, it would likely take you around 40 years to see every single beach in Australia, just to give an indication. It's a huge country with lots of opportunity and a low population considering its size as well. Okay, now you also get the opportunity to experience a new culture and diverse traditions. Now, the good thing is, guys, is that South Africans have actually been relocating to Australia for decades and decades. So we've got an extremely good reputation in Australia. The Australians are well aware of the fact that we are not scared of a hard day's labor. We come from an employment market where we have over 30% of our country unemployed, whereas in Australia, they have around a 3.5% unemployment rate in their country. So the jobs are there ready and waiting. You know, South Africans, we tend to get a job, we keep our head down, we try not to make trouble with our boss and make it work so we can support our household and families. Whereas in Australia, they kind of spoiled for choice. Your boss doesn't treat you very well. There's hundreds and hundreds of other jobs. You go find another one if you choose to do so as well. Okay. Now, of course, one of the greatest things is that skilled migration into Australia is a direct pathway to citizenship. You would generally just need to go over and evidence eventually that you have spent around 3 years onshore in Australia as a permanent resident holder before you can start applying for citizenship. Once that gets approved, congratulations, you're now in retention of the 5th strongest passport on the planet. The clients that we've remained in contact with that have moved over to their citizenship status, they actually start traveling a lot the moment they get their Australian passports. The main reason for this is that the Australian passport allows you to see and visit 183 countries around the world without having to apply for a visit visa first. So most of our clients that have moved over to the citizenship status are now starting to travel and see the world. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so of course in Australia, these are the 4 sort of main categories of visas that you get. 99% of you have been quoted for the Australian Skilled Migration Program. This is, of course, we call it the golden ticket or the Rolls-Royce sort of entry, because it doesn't require an applicant to secure employment, communicate with recruiters. You simply gain access and residency based on your skill set. Okay, then another popular one that we deal with, especially due to the fact that we are a hybrid agency, so we actually do a bit of immigration as well as recruitment. Any applicants coming through the skilled migrant program, our objective would be to, of course, place you as well. We actually generate quite a lot of our revenue through placing our applicants. The good thing is it's not something that our clients need to pay us for. It's something that adds value to our service. We look for work for you for free, and if we are able to secure you an employment offer prior to you securing your own, it's not something you guys need to pay us for. Like I said, we're incentivized to do so. We will simply invoice the employer in Australia or employers. They pay us for placing our applicants. Okay, wonderful. Now, of course, the Australian employer-sponsored visa, this is often something that our applicants will explore during the course of the skilled migration program. As you guys all know, skilled migration has an average turnaround time of around 14 to 18 months. So what a lot of applicants do is they come on board for stage 1 for the skills assessment. This is the best way to evidence to not only to the government or the assessing authority in Australia, but of course to potential employers that your occupation or your qualifications and your work experience actually fall in line with the standards expected for the occupation in Australia. So what most applicants will do, get their skills assessment and English exam done. While we're running the rest of the skilled migration program in the background, they work with our in-house recruitment division as well as scouring for work themselves. And the great thing is that you can actually attach the completed skills assessment and your English exam to your job applications. Now, of course, us being an actual recruiter, we've got partners in Australia, recruitment companies, engineering firms, that we've actually physically partnered with, and we've spoken to them and asked them firsthand. And what they tell us is, let's say, for example, they run a vacancy for a diesel mechanic, and they get 100 international applications, but there's 3 applicants that have completed their skills assessment. They literally push the 97 applicants aside, and they first focus on the applicants with the skills assessment. because often it's a requirement of the visa application. It also shows that these applicants are financially committed and serious to relocating to Australia. And of course, it's the best way, like I mentioned earlier, to evidence that your qualifications and the experience you obtain post-qualification do indeed fall in line with the standards expected for the occupation in Australia. Okay, wonderful. Now, of course, you do get various different types of employer-sponsored visas. The most common would be the General 482 work permit. Another one that we often facilitate is something called the 494 employer-sponsored. This is generally where an employer is based in a slightly more regional area, and the government or their local government acknowledges that they're in a regional area. They then sponsor you for a 3-year work permit, and once that permit is run to an end, and it's an automatic progression to residency. You do not need the employer to give you permission at the end of the 494. It's an automatic sort of progression to the residency status. Wonderful. Now, of course, the best of the best employer-sponsored, but we just don't see it very often, is, of course, the wonderful and glorious subclass 186 employer-sponsored. Now, the reason that this is such an incredible opportunity is that if an employer trusts you well enough from the get-go and your occupation is on the medium to long-term critical skills list, then they can, in theory, immediately, through an employment sponsor, go down the 186 route. Now, this is, again, the same sort of pathway like a 482 or 494, except the end product is not a work permit. It's actually a straight residency status. But, of course, guys, the reason we don't see it very often is once you've got that residency status, and sorry if I offend anybody, but for lack of a better term, once you become a resident, you can kind of give the employer the middle finger and say, thanks for getting me residency. Me and my family are going our own way. So most employers will generally sponsor applicants for something called the 482 or the 494, because that kind of binds you to the employer for X amount of time. But most of our applicants, when they go over on these work permits, they will actually continue to work with us in the background, and we continue to apply for them independently, their skilled migrant program, and obtain them residency in the background. You want to limit, ideally, the amount of time you spend in us on a work permit, because then, of course, you are fronting things like healthcare, education, and there's a lack of social security as well. So the quicker we can get you over to residency, the quicker the perks kick in, and the quicker your pathway to citizenship can commence. Okay, wonderful. Now, with regards to parent visas, this is something that it's unlikely that we've spoken to many of you about, but it's likely that this is something festering in the back of your minds. Now, Australia actually offers some incredible pathways to parents. But if you want to get your parents into Australia, unless they're extremely high net worth individuals and they've got around 2.2 million Australian dollars to buy their way in through state capital bonds, it's likely that your parents' pathway will be dependent on you gaining access first. So there's a couple of visas that you can look at for your parents. One of them is a temporary sponsored parent visa. This is simply a glorified long-term visit visa. You get the 3-year and the 5-year term, but it allows parents to come and spend at least 3 to 5 years with you at a time. Okay, they cannot work and they don't have access to any of the sort of benefits. Now, the best sort of parent visa to be looking at would be something like the contributory parent visa. So if your parents later down the line can evidence that at least 50% of their children are based in Australia as residents, they then become eligible to apply for permanent residency themselves. Now, guys, this is incredible because it means that your parents aren't coming over, they don't need sponsorship or anything like that. They can obtain residency. If they still want to work, they can. They can open a little coffee shop or a biltong shop if they choose to do so, and they have full access to Medicare for the rest of their life. So it's an incredible opportunity. If you want to do some research in the background, this is known as the contributory parent visa, and it's a visa that we specialize in as well. But of course, this pathway is generally reliant on you guys gaining access, and then that ripple effect allowing your parents to gain access thereafter. Okay, now the last one I wanted to chat about, this one's a quick one, a study permit, very self-explanatory. You get yourself enrolled into a college or university in Australia, you approach us, and we simply apply for a study permit. Now, a study permit does allow you to work, but it generally only allows you to legally render about 20 hours a week of work. So you would need to have quite a lot of capital to your name. The Australian government wants to see that you've got enough capital to support yourself. And of course, the tuition fees in Australia are higher than in South Africa, but we do get a lot of demand for it, where applicants or parents are wanting their kids to obtain an international qualification. One of the main reasons for this is that South Africa still holds Washington Accord, Dublin, and Sydney Accord accredited universities, but there's talk and there's fear in the market as to how long these accreditations will remain in South Africa. If they pull the plug, you go to Stellenbosch University and your engineering degree is not Washington Accord accredited, you're going to have a lot of trouble gaining international traction or getting jobs abroad or going through programs like this. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so with regards to skilled migration, there are some fundamental requirements. Most of you, sorry if this is a bit of rinse and repeat, most of you are fairly well versed on this program, but the more we drill this into you, the more comfortable you're going to be with the program. The more comfortable you are with the program, the more likely you are to make use of the opportunity. So of course, the first thing that we would do when an applicant leaves us an inquiry is check, is their occupation actually on the Australian critical skills list? It is. Wonderful. What type of visa options are available? Great. 189, 190, or 491. Once we determine that the occupation is relevant to this particular program, we will then conduct an assessment. And this assessment is on sort of 4 primary aspects. It's the main applicant's age, it's the main applicant's highest level of education, it's the main applicant's years of work experience, and the main applicant's English ability. Now, of course, if you have a partner, the partner can contribute points either on the English front. So if you have a partner, we would always recommend that both applicants do the English exam, because with these types of programs, guys, the higher the points, the reality is the quicker you get selected. So our objective is to bank you guys as many points as possible to fast track the selection rounds for you. Now, your partner can do the English exam, and so long as they can score at least a competent threshold, then they are able to add 5 points towards the household application. Now, of course, often you will bring in a skilled partner. So if you are bringing a partner to the table that also has qualifications and experience that are on the Australian critical skills list, then if your partner is also willing to do a skills assessment and do the English exam, as opposed to just getting 5 points for partner's competent English, then you can obtain 10 points. 5 of that goes to the partner's skill set, and 5 of that goes to the partner's competent English. So we would always suggest, if there are 2 applicants within the household that both have occupations on the skills list, we would always recommend that both of you do a skills assessment. And the main reasons for this, guys, is that we've seen through trend analysis over the years that we like to call them power couples, where both applicants in the household have skill sets we can utilize. Now, power couples tend to obtain priority during selection rounds. So if you had Mark here, who's a civil engineer, sitting on, or he's 28 years old with a degree, 3 years experience, and he scores English, but my partner is a bar lady with no tertiary education, and then you've got Simon that comes in, we study together, same age, everything, but Simon's partner is an occupational therapist, also on the critical skills list. Generally, Simon would be given priority during selection rounds because he's bringing in a skilled partner. Hence the reason we always say, get both your skills assessments done. Another main benefit of having both skills assessments completed is we can reverse the roles at any point. So let's say, for example, if you guys are looking to go to Queensland, for example, and the main applicant's occupation is not open for Queensland, but the partner's occupation is open for Queensland, we can immediately reverse the roles, make the co-applicant the main applicant, and we can submit an expression on their expression of interest on their profile as well. So not only does it maximize your sort of options and opportunities, but it gives you priority during selection rounds as well. Okay, wonderful. So of course, once the skills assessment and the language exam are completed, as you can see, the final part of stage 1 is we will then go approach states or territories for you and submit something called an EOI. All that means, guys, is an expression of interest. So an EOI is us basically taking a little snippet of your profile, presenting it to a particular state or territory, and once that state or territory picks it up, they will invite us to submit your full formal application. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so these are some of the requirements for an employer-sponsored visa, or as most of you will know it, a work permit, or the 482, 494, 186s. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do is, of course, get a job. So you would need an employer that says, fantastic, we're happy to offer you a position without you having a visa secured. And that is often one of the hardest things to do, because there's often a catch-22 that takes place where the employer will say, look, go get a visa first, and then I'll offer you a job. And the government says, sorry, you need to secure the employment offer first before we even willing for you to start your visa application. So with regards to employer-sponsored visas, of course, logic suggests you would need to get a job first. Then once you've secured the employment offer, then we would need to move on to a sponsorship arrangement. And this is pretty much where the employer not only evidences to the government in Australia that they've tried their best to try and hire a local resident or citizen first. Of course, guys, as you can imagine, to keep the unemployment rate low, you can't just go offer any Tom, Dick, or Harry in any country a job and bring them in. You have to prove to the Australian government that you have tried to hire a local resident or citizen first. And part of that sponsorship agreement is you have to evidence that the international applicant you wanted to bring in to fill the vacancy does indeed meet the requirements for the position. Okay, wonderful. Now, of course, look, all work permits would require you to evidence your English proficiency. I actually had an applicant today. It was a diesel mechanic. He asked me, why do I need to do an English exam? And I said, look, don't worry, we'll guide you. We'll provide you with preparation material and a tutor. But you are going to an English-speaking country. It's the only sort of mother tongue in Australia. And you are coming from a country that has 13, 14 national languages. They want to ensure that you can communicate and to do your job correctly. I mean, you don't want to not be able to communicate in English. The person asks for a tool and you pass the wrong tool and you're putting somebody's life in danger potentially. I know it's an extreme example, but anybody coming into Australia through work permits or through skilled migration does need to evidence the English proficiency. Okay, now of course this is a sort of requirement for both skilled migration and work permits. You would need to evidence that you're of good health and of good character. Now, of good health is providing a full comprehensive medical to show that you, of course, not bringing in anything deemed dangerous to the Australians, maybe something like HIV or AIDS, for example, or something that might be deemed as a burden to the healthcare system, maybe something like cancer, for example. So we would generally ask an applicant during the course of the application if they have any sort of chronic ailments or they have any previous history with our police force this side as well. Now, of course, the character requirements, this is, of course, simply having a clear criminal background check. So Australia hates things like DUI. So if there's any guys out there that are still planning on really proceeding with this program, behave yourselves. If you are going to be having some fun, please Uber it. If you do get a DUI offense, we will not offer representation. It's a guaranteed rejection. And, of course, the other ones that lead to rejection is violent crimes like grievous bodily harm or assault. Okay, so behave yourselves, guys. And then, of course, the requirements of an Australian employer-sponsored is that you've completed your skills assessment so that you can evidence that the qualifications and experience fall in line with Australian standards. Okay, wonderful. Okay, great. So, guys, now I want to actually go through the pros and cons of maybe skilled migration and a work permit. So what we'll do is we'll go through the employer-sponsored 482 and we'll look at some of the pros. We'll look at some of the pros of the Australian Skilled Migration Program. We've used the 491 as our sort of demo. Now, with regards to the 482, look, the biggest pros is that family and dependents, well, partner and dependents join immediately. So one of the beautiful aspects of Australian immigration is that they never split families apart. Other countries like New Zealand, America, the UK, the main applicant will often have to go over for anything from 6 to 12 months first until they meet family reunification requirements. So they would need to say, great, I've generated X amount of revenue onshore in New Zealand or the UK. Now I'd like to bring my partner and dependents over. Now with Australia, it's completely different. They never split families apart. If you receive a job offer and you apply for a work permit, we apply for your partner and your kids' work permits at the same time, and everybody's visas are approved at the same time. So you always, with regards to Australia, relocate as a household. Look, don't get me wrong, you might all get your visas and the husband says, great, I'm going to go over for 3 months. I'm going to go get the accommodation all sorted, figure out everything, set up the bank account, get the driver's license, and in 3 months you guys come over so there's not as much stress that side. That can be done, but your visas in theory are actually approved and issued on the same day. Okay, now of course on a work permit, your spouse actually receives, or partner, you do not have to be married for any of the programs we facilitate. You can either be married and apply as spouses, or you can apply as common law partners. Now, of course, guys, common law partnership, you will have to evidence shared financials and prove that you've been cohabiting or living together for 12 months prior to the visa submission. Okay, but the bottom line is that your partner will receive an open work permit. So your partner won't be bound to any particular field of expertise. They can work at a shopping center, or they can work as an engineer or as a teacher. It's an open work permit. The clue is kind of in the title, full working rights, no restrictions. Okay. Now, of course, the benefit of a work permit, like we mentioned earlier, instant gratification, knowing you've got a job ready and waiting for you on arrival. Okay. Now, of course, one of the main benefits is that 99% of the time when you receive a job offer from an Australian employer, they will likely pay for your visa. Now, most of the time what we're seeing is that the employer in Australia will pay for the nomination, the skills levy, and they'll pay for the main applicant's work permit, but it's often the responsibility of the family to pay for the partner and any dependents' work permits. Okay. Now, of course, all the new sort of immigration minister that is spinning things up, she wants to rehaul this whole system. What she's wanting to do is make every single work permit a pathway to permanent residency. So all sort of work permits will eventually lead to residency, which is great. And what we always recommend is if you qualify for skilled migration, run this in the background. I mean, you carrying on with your everyday life while we're processing this for you. You go over to Australia on a work permit. One day we come knocking and saying, just letting you know, you're no longer on a work permit, you're now a resident of the country. So running skilled migration in the background will, of course, limit the amount of time you spend on your work permit. Okay, now average sort of processing time for a work permit. This is not from the date you decide that you're going to do a work permit. This is generally from the date the visa was actually submitted. And on average, they're being fast-tracked in around 30 to 90 days. Okay, wonderful. All right, so everybody happy with the work permit? Let's look at some of the pros of the skilled migration program. Okay, so of course, as with the work permit, like I mentioned, they never split families apart. Your family, spouse, minus dependents, everybody inherits the same status as the main applicant. So if mom or dad obtain residency, the partner and all the kids obtain the same status, residency, and it's approved on the same day. Okay, what this means is, of course, that your spouse will have full working rights, no restrictions on any particular field of expertise. Like on the work permit, the only difference is that the spouse will have benefits like healthcare, education subsidized. The good thing with the skilled migration program is that you're free to change employers within your sponsored state. So you're not bound to any particular employer. You are generally, with Australian skilled migration, bound to a particular state or territory, but work for anybody you want. Okay. Now, of course, you can independently apply for permanent residency if criteria is met. What this means is that you are not reliant on an employer to gain residency. Your occupation is on the Australian critical skills list. You meet the requirements. You did the justice by going into your field of expertise, and you gain your family residency in Australia simply based on your skill set. Now, of course, the benefits, immediate access to free healthcare and education for kids. All of the primary, government, primary, middle school and high schools are state subsidized, so you'll never pay any school fees in Australia. And of course, the whole family, not just the main applicant, like I mentioned earlier, has full access to Medicare, the state-funded healthcare system. Okay, now I'm sure you guys are all aware of this, but the average sort of processing times for these programs is around 14 to 18 months. The reason we always give average processing times, every single family, applicant, or household is different. You know, some clients come on board very organized. After 2-3 weeks, we've got all the documents we need and we process or move on to the submission quicker. Other clients, you know, we have to poke them in the back every now and again, saying, oi, we still need these particular documents to move on to the submission. So it can go a little bit quicker and it can go a little bit slower, guys. But what we always like to reiterate to our clients, this type of process is done at your own pace. A lot of people think, and my clients that I've consulted with, you probably go, oh, he says that all the time, is that immigration is like a roller coaster. You just jump on and you hang on for dear life. But I always say the better analogy would be or to utilize would be that you are actually physically in the driving seat. You have your foot on the gas. We are sitting next to you, holding your hands, project managing this entire process, simply ensuring that from the get-go, everything meets legislative requirements first time round. Okay, wonderful. All right, let's look at some of the cons of each particular pathway. Now, of course, on the work permit, your visa is tied to your employment offer. So let's say, for lack of a better example, I get a job offer at Coca-Cola in Sydney. Now, on my actual work permit, it's going to say Coca-Cola Sydney, and I cannot leave them. If I terminate employment or walk out, or they go, Mark, look, you're not fitting the role, we're putting the plug, I've now breached my visa terms, and I've got 60 days to pack up and leave. Okay. Then, of course, employer needs to sponsor permanent residency if you do not qualify for the skilled migration route. So, like, for example, on a 482 work permit, it would actually be the employer that says, great, Mark, you've proved yourself. You've become an integral part of our team. We love you to bits, and we see the benefit of keeping you on long term, and we would now like to nominate you and your family for permanent residency. So it often is reliant on the employer saying, great, Mark, you've proved yourself. Let's move on, get you over onto residency. Okay. Now, of course, medical insurance on a work permit, this is the applicant's responsibility. Most applicants going over on work permits tend to apply for international healthcare initially until they get residency. Maybe something like BUPA, for example, BUPA is one of the most common ones. It's internationally recognized and it works for Australia as well. Okay. And of course, you pay for education. So while you're on a work permit, you can send your kids to school. Most of the time when you obtain a work permit, your kids will obtain an open study permit so they can go to any educational institution. But of course, you are going to be fronting it and funding it independently yourselves. Okay, cool. So let's have a look at some of the cons of skilled migration. So no guaranteed employment on arrival, but of course, very, very, very few of our clients that I've assisted over the last 7 years immigrate to Australia without employment. The vast majority of them will get their residency first, then they secure their job offers, and then they relocate. Remember, guys, it's a lot easier to secure an employment offer once you're a resident because there's absolutely no cost to company to actually bring you in. There's no sponsorship requirement, no skills levy. They're employing a resident. So it's just a matter of formalizing your employment date. The only clients that I've actually seen relocate without employment over the last few years is unfortunately clients that have maybe been victims of violent crime. They don't feel safe in South Africa, so the moment their visas are approved, they're often on the first flights out of here, which is quite sad, and then they scrounge up an employment offer onshore in Australia. Me personally, I'm a dad, I've got 2 kids. I would want to make sure that my visas are approved. I would want to make sure that my wife and I have employment before I'm jumping on a flight and I'm going over to a first world country. That's what most of our clients do, is get visa first, then get job, then relocate. Okay. Now, of course, the one con, it's not a major con, but you are going to be bound to a particular state or territory. The pro of that is that you know that the jobs are there ready and waiting. The only reason that that particular state or territory would endorse your application and invite you to come reside in their particular state or territory is because they have more vacancies available in your job role than they have qualified applicants to fill these vacancies. Okay. Now, of course, you're not under house arrest, guys. You can travel during this time frame. They just want to see that the main applicant's address and employer's address is within a state or territory or high demand, but it's a multiple entry residency visa. Pop across to Thailand for a week, come back to South Africa for the festive period. And like I said, you're not under house arrest. It's a multiple entry visa. They just want to see that you reside in an area of high demand. Okay. Now, of course, you can independently apply for permanent residency if criteria is met. This is the main objective of skilled migration, is to obtain permanent residency without the need to secure an employment offer first and not be bound to one employer, but arrive with all the perks. Okay, wonderful. Okay. Okay, guys, so that's kind of the gist of our presentation today. I'm sure you guys want to get on to evening, but I just wanted to leave you with a sort of final thought. Now, as most of you know, unfortunately, those guys that we're speaking to that are in South Africa, I'm sure you've seen, you've heard, the rand is in a bit of a free fall at the moment. Now, this becomes a big issue for South Africans because the vast majority of the fees related to this program are static in Australian dollars, which means the longer we drag our feet, the more the rand depreciates, the more expensive these programs become. I mean, you put it this way, when I got into immigration in 2017, one Australian dollar would only get you 9 rand. Yesterday, when I checked, it was 12 rand 77, and when I checked this morning, it had already gone up to 12 rand 90. So in one day, we had lost 23 cents. So, like I always say, with these types of programs, if you qualify, especially with regards to what's happening with our economy, get your foot in the door. Nobody is asking you to leave anytime soon. This is a 14 to 18 month program, and once it's concluded, they still give you up to 2 years afterwards to physically relocate. And the good thing is, like your consultants would have told you, we take this stage by stage. Come on board for stage 1. Let's get your skills assessments done. Once that's done, well done, guys. It's complete now. When do you want to move on to stage 2? But the quicker you get the ball rolling, the cheaper the process is going to be in the long run. Okay, now what I said to one of my clients earlier is like, Mark, are you sure life is going to be better in Australia and not like South Africa? So I actually said to him, look, at the end of the day, in 5 years, you're going to be telling one of 2 stories. The first story is you're still in South Africa, you're going to be moaning about stage 15 load shedding, still moaning about the crime, the lack of opportunity, unemployment, or the other story that you could be telling yourself in 5 years is the journey that you've gone through, the investment you made into you and your family. You're now in a first world country, you've been in Australia long enough, and you guys are officially Australian citizens. So I'll leave you with that thought. But again, guys, thank you very much for making time to come and meet us tonight. Thank you for hearing me out. And please, if there's any sort of questions, queries, concerns that you guys have, please reach out directly to your consultant. Either email them, set up another call, another video interaction. Let's get you guys to the point where, you know, you're ready, you want to come on board. We want to leave no stone unturned. We don't want you jumping on board prematurely. So if there is anything that you want to get out the way, we always say there are no silly questions in this game. Leave no stone unturned. But like I said, we would love to work with all of you. All of your profiles are great, and definitely you all have the type of application that will help us maintain our high success rates. So anything you guys need, reach out. But thanks again, guys. Thanks for your time, and I hope you all have an incredible evening and an incredible week further. Thank you very much. Goodbye.